following stories are very dark and disturbing. Listener's discretion is advised. You have been warned.
This happened 5 years ago. I'd met some guy through some friends I had at the time. He only spoke Spanish, which I didn't mind because Spanish was actually my first language. He was around my age, which was 26 at the time. I knew he was into me, but I wasn't interested, and he wasn't really my type anyways. My friends and I would always hang out with him and his friends and do different things like go to the mountains or quad riding, but mainly just drink and hang out. But eventually, I had started to like him, and we had started hanging out on our own, and well, that led to us hooking up. After that, we became a thing. He would bring me around his brothers and cousins. Whenever I would sleep over, it was almost always a different house, and he always had different cars, which I thought was weird. And whenever I asked him what he did for work, he would just say construction. I found out that he was here illegally and he grew weed illegally, but by then I had already liked him a lot, so I didn't really care. Plus, back then I was really careless, and I didn't really think of my future, and I was really just wanting to have fun at the moment. He had asked me out and to be his girlfriend, and of course I said yes. I mean, we were always together, so it just made sense for me to become his girlfriend. So that's how I went for about a year or so. We would always see each other, sometimes during the week and always on the weekends. One day I got a text from a random number saying that it's his girlfriend, and they said that they lived together. I texted back and I asked who it was, but she said it would be best if I just stopped talking to him and that she can't tell me. I called the number a couple of times, but she never answered. When I saw him again, I obviously told him, but he said it was probably just his crazy ex fucking with me. So I stayed with him. I did begin to notice that he would always get calls late at night whenever I was with him. I thought that maybe he really was cheating, but I never actually found any proof, so I ignored it. Well, the same number reached out to me again a couple of months later. This time, however, she said that she was pregnant and that I'm really dumb for not leaving him. I told her that I didn't believe anything she was saying and to send me proof or to meet up and talk to me, but she always said no. She then reached out to me by Facebook, and she would message me on there. She looked a little younger than me, but on her profile there was only pictures of her, not of him. One day when I was with him, I had seen a Facebook message pop up on his phone, and it was the same girl. I told him that that's the girl who had been messaging me, and why is he messaging her? He said that it's his friend and that she tends to do favors for him, like putting things in her name and ordering stuff that he needs. The girl would always message me and tell me that she was with him on the weekends, and that's why he didn't answer me, and that was also why he wasn't with me, that he was with her. We would always message back and forth over Facebook. She would say things to me like, "You have fun with him today. I was with him last night," kind of mocking me and talking shit, saying they had sex the night before, things like that. So I would do the same, and that's just kind of how it went on. Well, one day I saw him and he was wearing a hospital bracelet. I had asked him if he was at the hospital and he told me yes, that she had the baby. I told him congratulations, but that I didn't want to be with him anymore, and to leave me alone and stay out of my life, that I'd had enough of him just going back and forth between the both of us. I would try and stop talking to him, but he would later text me and call me nonstop saying that he misses me and that he has to see me, and I would always give in. I was so stupid. Then one night I went to the gym with my sister-in-law. Once we got there, I'd got a video call from the girl. She was once again bragging that she was with him. I told her to show me and give me proof. Well, she did. He was right there next to her laying in bed. I then told the both of them to just leave me alone already and to just be happy. He got so mad and started yelling at her that he had snatched the phone from her and then had hung up. I then texted him saying that I'm done, this time for real. But of course, he kept blowing up my phone. which I ignored until he then texted me to come outside. I don't know how he knew that I was at the gym, but I was always there at night at that time, so I'm sure he just knew. I had told him to leave and that I didn't want to talk to him, but he was just begging me to go outside to talk. So I went outside, and he was parked in the front in his big white truck. I saw that he had blood all over his shirt, and when I asked him what happened, he said that he had punched the wall and hurt his hand. I was a bit uneasy, so I just talked to him from the window, saying, "Well, what's up? Why are you here?" He said that he needed a favor and to please help him. He then told me that he needed me to take him to Tijuana and that he won't bother me anymore after that. When I asked him why, he said that he really fucked up and that he hit that girl and that she called the cops on him, so they're probably out looking for him. Well, my dumbass felt sorry for him. He looked so scared and worried. I agreed, and we ended up leaving his truck there and went in my car. On the way over there, he had hardly even spoke to me. He just looked really scared. I kept telling him that I'm not getting back with him and to never call me again once I drop him off. He just kept saying that he fucked up. So I had asked him, "Well, what exactly did you do?" He said that he had hit her and that she fell. It kind of didn't make any sense, but he didn't want to talk about it, so I believed him. Anyway, once we finally got to Tijuana, he had threw out his cell phone and broke it. Then he asked me for some money to buy a new one since he didn't have any money on him. He said that he would have his brother pay me back when I got back. It was pretty late, I'd say, around 10 p.m., so we checked into a hotel and I decided I was going to leave in the morning since it was getting so late. In reality, I had no idea what was going on. The whole night was pretty normal. We both just ended up falling asleep, and he barely even talked. So the next morning I told him I was leaving, and he had begged me not to leave and to live with him in Mexico. I told him that I was just doing him a favor and that I never wanted to speak with him again after this. He kept trying to hold me down and to get me to stay with him, but I just said it was over. He had this look of desperation on his face, almost crying. I felt really uneasy. I told him I was going to get something from my car. I then walked out of the room to the lobby and then to my car. Right as I was leaving though, I could see him running down the stairs towards my car. I left so fast and I could see him running after me in my car. I finally crossed back and then went home. I didn't hear anything from him until a couple of days later. I got a call from his brother saying that he was going to pay me back the money that I gave him and to take him to his truck since the truck was still parked at the gym. I went to the gym and got into the truck. It was unlocked and the keys were in it. When I was in the truck, I had noticed what looked like dried blood on the steering wheel, as well as the driver's door and handles. Then I remembered that he had told me that he had punched a wall and that that's why he was bleeding, so I figured that's all it was. I drove the truck to his brother's house and I'd left it parked outside while my friend in my car drove behind me. Then I left. I didn't even wait until he came out to get the keys. After that, I blocked my ex, as well as everyone connected to him. I was really sad, but I knew it was for the best that I wasn't with him anymore. I just continued with my daily routine. Well, one night on my way to the gym, I got pulled over. I was with my sister-in-law at the time, and I had no idea why they pulled me over. They just kept saying that I had to go with them to the station, and then they'll explain everything there. They were being so aggressive, and I was really scared because I had no idea what I could have done. But in the back of my head, I just knew that it had something to do with my ex. So once I got to the station, they had put me in an interrogation room, and they had started asking questions about where I was the night that I last spoke to my ex. I then asked if he was okay. What they told me next, I was not expecting. They said that night he had shot the girl in the head and killed her right in front of their newborn baby. Then he fled. I was shocked. I didn't even know what to say. I just started thinking of that night and why he was acting so strange. Everything made sense now. I was now thinking that they probably think that I was in on it and that I helped him get away. I told them the truth on what happened and everything that I knew. They took my DNA and they told me they'd be in touch. They also searched my phone and even kept my car for a while. At that same time, other officers went to my dad's house and then raided it. They flipped the whole house over looking for murder weapons. My parents were so confused and scared. A couple of weeks passed, and then months, and I never heard anything else from anyone. I think my ex tried to get a hold of me one time on Instagram through a weird profile. He had sent me a random DM, and when I asked who it was, he had sent me a song. The way that I knew it was him was the song that he had sent me was our song, but I never replied and just blocked the profile immediately. I did a few months later hear a rumor that he got killed in Mexico. I didn't want to hear or know anything about it, and I still don't even know if it's true. I still to this day feel somewhat guilty. Maybe if I would have left him since I first got that text from her, she would still be alive. It's really weird because I never even saw a violent side to him. I couldn't even see him doing something like that. My friends and family all tell me that I got really lucky that he didn't kill me as well. Anyways, I'm really trying my best to put it all behind me and try not to dwell and think about the what ifs. It's now been years later, and still to this day, I haven't heard anything else, and I don't want to know. This memory of mine begins about 3 years ago when I graduated high school. I had grown up with my grandparents but decided to move to a different and much larger city to live with my dad for the first time in 12 years. I somewhat knew the city already because I had spent summers with him, but this would be the first time I would have the freedom of an adult. To come and go as I pleased, to drive my car anywhere, smoke cigarettes whenever I wanted. I was excited, though sad to leave all my friends. As soon as I was settled in, my dad and stepmom sat me down to discuss a few rules and what I needed to know about the complex. Basically things like go wherever you want, but let us know when you leave and when you're coming back, even if it's 2 a.m. Oh, and you'll have to park on the street because the apartment complex has limited parking. Oh, and one more thing. There's this neighborhood creep. This guy, George, was well known to all the women in the complex as well as the police that patrolled the area. He was tall and fairly huge, very intimidating looking. My parents were pretty certain that he would leave me alone for one reason: my dad. Though George had a habit of stalking other women in the complex, he would stop and find a new target if they had a man make a show of being in their place. Whether that be a brother, a lover, or a father. It didn't matter what he was to the woman or what he looked like. George would back off immediately. Since I lived with my dad, who is also quite tall and rather big and intimidating, I also felt confident that I would be alright. And I was for a time. It started about 6 months after I moved in. My stepmom and dad were fighting a lot more until she eventually got up and left him. One night I was sitting on my porch having a cigarette and browsing Facebook or whatever. I wish I could say that I felt like I was being watched, but I probably just looked up because I felt a bug or something. Well, George was standing about 15 feet away, a little behind a tree, staring intently at me. I nearly dropped my cigarette. Shakily, I stubbed it out and went inside. I was home alone, so I made sure to lock all my doors, and then I played a video game in my room. I told myself that I was probably just paranoid. The next morning, I got up for my morning cigarette and coffee. Lo and behold, minutes after I got into my porch, George came ambling out of his apartment to look my way. I sucked down my cigarette and went back inside. This pattern continued for a couple of weeks. It was like George stood at his sliding glass door peeking out, waiting just to see when I would pop out. I told my dad about it, and he tried to sit with me whenever I went out to smoke. If he came with me, George wouldn't even peep a head out of his door. Of course, the other women in the complex have already tried to call police about George. But he lives in the complex, and staring isn't a crime. so there really wasn't much they could do. I didn't know how far George had taken it with the other women before. With that info in my mind, I knew calling wouldn't be much use. Things slowly escalated. Once my stepmom left, I had access to her parking spot. So I had 3 ways to get from my car to my apartment depending on how I parked. One of the ways went just past George's apartment, about 5 feet from his door. Since I got off work late most nights, I avoided that route as much as possible. Slowly but surely, like he memorized my schedule, he would be on the path where I was coming home. Not directly on the concrete, but a few feet away on the grass, behind a tree. It was like he thought that I couldn't see him. Picture a child hiding very terribly behind a tree. You can see 90% of their body and you just know that they're there. That's how he would do it. I would rush past him, avoid eye contact, but prepare to scream if I heard him come after me. I started to carry my keys between my fingertips. I bought a pocket knife, and I would walk from my car with it halfway open already, even though I'd never been in any kind of fight in my life. Right around this time, I believe my mom was trying to find me free self-defense classes, since I couldn't afford anything on my tight budget. My dad was steadily getting more and more pissed off as George edged closer and closer to escalating as the days went by. It went from November to May. If my dad wasn't home, I would lock my bedroom door and keep a knife under my pillow. I would Skype all night with my boyfriend, just so someone could call 911 for me if need be. I put a bunch of flower pots in front of my bedroom window so no one can get in silently. I started sitting on the floor of my porch below the wall out of sight to smoke, but angled so I could see him if he walked up to it. Nightmares of being kidnapped or raped or murdered started to invade my sleep every night. Then one day my neighbor Shell was gossiping to me. "Didn't you hear about George?" No. He got arrested last night. Now, in the complex parking lot, there's a big sort of electrical power box, if you will. It stands about waist height and is perhaps 2 or 3 feet wide. About 10 minutes before I was supposed to come home, and then park right in front of it, some lady with her kid were walking by, and they saw George sitting on the box masturbating. Was he there waiting for me? Jerking off to the thought of me seeing him? Ugh. That thought makes me want to puke and scares me all at the same time. I was relieved for a few days of my stress, but it was only a few days that he was gone. Then he was back, and he went right back to the same old routine. One night he got far braver. It was maybe about 7 p.m. when I went out for a cigarette with my dad. A neighbor had walked up to chat with my dad, and George came outside and stood out in the open, just staring me down. "Yeah, this dude's just asking to get his fucking ass kicked," my dad said under his breath. Then he chatted to the neighbor some more. I rolled my eyes, went inside, and then played some more video games. I was healing in a World of Warcraft dungeon when I heard Shell shouting, "Where are you?" But I was healing, a pretty important job in the game, and I figured she was talking to someone else. That is until she burst into my room in a panic, her eyes huge. She hopped from foot to foot frantically like she was doing the potty dance. "He's bleeding!" "Who?" I asked in bewilderment. "Your dad! Come quick!" I made some teenager huffing sound and left my computer, certainly pissing off the rest of the group. I grabbed our little first aid kit filled with band-aids. I thought in my mind that my dad was doing something stupid like tossing up his pocket knife and trying to catch it. But when I stepped outside, I found myself face to face with a real horror. About 6 people surrounded my dad, including Shell, as well as my neighbor Caleb held a shirt to my dad's side. He was facing away from me, and his entire back was just covered in blood. It looked like he had been mauled by a bear. That was seriously my first thought. I didn't know if we had bears in this city. Caleb's hold on the shirt slipped, and then blood sprayed. I even feel queasy writing this down. I've never in my life been the person that people turn to in an emergency. Blood makes me lightheaded, and I have anxiety attacks over not being able to find a specific bookmark. But all of the adults around me were panicked aside from Caleb. People around 30 to 40, while I was just 18. I needed to be the person that people turned to. I threw the first aid kit onto the porch and then told Shell where we keep our towels. She rushed to go grab one. "Has anyone here called 911? I shouted. I kid you not. 5 pairs of eyes turned to look at me like they never even heard of 911 before. "No," my dad said. "I can't afford an ambulance." "Shut up," I said. "What happened?" "That fucker stabbed me." So I dialed 911 and relayed our address and reason for emergency. The operator told us to keep applying pressure to the wound in my father's lower back. My dad is a true champ. Even though the sidewalk was just one big puddle of blood, he stayed on his feet until someone thought to run and go get him a chair. I ran back and forth along the walkways to get to the police and show them the house that George lived in. And then I ran back and forth to get the paramedics. They were so cold and so agonizingly slow. They walked calmly, and I wanted to scream at them. "Run! My dad could be bleeding out! Don't you fucking care?" I learned later that day that they don't run because if they let adrenaline kick in, mistakes can happen. They shoved Caleb out of the way because he refused to let go of my dad's wound and then got him packed into the ambulance. I was about to jump on when the police stopped me and they told me I had to stay so I could give my statement. My dad shouted at me to call his boss, and I remembered all his allergies and whatnot for the paramedics. God, 2 years later and all these details are still burned into my brain. I gave my statement to the police. They then made me sit outside the complex on the sidewalk for 2 to 3 hours. They kept me updated on my dad. Once I called his boss my boss and answered my stepmom's message, that's when I finally allowed myself to break down. It felt like I cried forever. One of the cops was nice enough to go into my house and grab my cigarettes and a bottle of water for me. He stayed with me the entire time just to make sure I didn't run off or something, but he was very nice. He offered to let me sit in his cruiser a few times just to get away from the cold. George was waiting in his apartment when they came. When they took him out to where I was, he still just kept trying to stare at me. Keep in mind there were 14 cop cars. 14. I stared right back at him, and I felt so much hatred that I've never felt in my life. I wanted to literally go over there and murder him. My babysitting cop looked over and saw that George was staring, so he used his flashlight to keep George from being able to look at me. Once it was all over, I was finally allowed to go back to my house where I waited for more information about my dad. I gathered the story from my neighbors while he was in the hospital for 9 days. My dad had apparently shouted at George to leave his daughter alone, and George had shouted back at him while I was in the house, totally unaware. George said something along the lines of, "Come tell me that to my face like a man." And well, my dad hopped over the porch and waltzed up to him. The creep had been waiting with a 12-inch blade held to the side of his leg. He struck out with his empty hand, then got my dad in the back with the knife. It missed his kidney very, very narrowly. It traveled up and punctured his lung and damaged his diaphragm. My dad didn't even realize he had been stabbed at first. He got George into a headlock and pummeled the shit out of him, thinking the dude had just punched him in the kidney. George dropped the knife, rolled in the grass, and then picked up another knife that he had been hiding and then stabbed my dad again, this time in the upper back. This wound was much more shallow but still required stitches later on. At this point, Shell came outside and screamed to my dad that he was bleeding. He took off his shirt, got pissed, and then threw it at George. At that point, the neighbor stalker then put his hands up and then went into his apartment. The blood stayed on the pavement until about noon the next day, when my neighbors kindly washed it off for me. I still have pictures in my email of it, as well as my dad's injuries. My dad spent more time in the hospital in critical condition than George spent being held in jail. I felt like it was all my fault. I've been addressing that in therapy, but I still feel awful about it, like my dad had to fight my own battle for me. Throughout the week while I was on my porch or just outside, I had so many women come up to me. Each and every one of them told me to thank my dad for them. They'd all been terrorized by George at some point, and now they were certain he would be away for good. Several of these poor women had George stalk them up to their apartment door and then pull his pants down, demanding sex. I can't believe the cops couldn't do anything. One of those days, one of my neighbors came up to tell me that the police had searched the complex, and they found that George stashed many knives all over the place, buried in gardens, stuck behind trees, and under his doormat. I shudder to think that he might have planned to one day grab one of his targets and do something far more sinister than just stare. George was declared guilty for battery with a deadly weapon, but the attempted murder charge was dropped. He was out of prison by Christmas on good behavior or whatever, but my dad and I have a lifelong restraining order against him. He has never tried to come after me, so I can only assume that he's terrified of my dad. I wish I could tell you guys that I took self-defense classes and that I learned to fight the way my dad can, but I'm still a pussy who can't even slap a spider. So there's that. My dad is doing all right now. He's just had his third surgery on Tuesday, trying to repair the damage done to him internally. We're hoping that this will be his last, and that his quality of life will vastly improve. I probably owe my life to my dad. If he hadn't fought George for me, maybe I would have been the first victim George stabbed. Hey everyone, that's about it for today's stories. If you have your own story that you would like to send, you can send it in at southerncannibal.com, or you can email it at southerncannibalstories@gmail.com. I look forward to telling your story. Have a good night or good day, everyone, and remember to always